I guess the key question is, how much of a difference did this new rate of New Start Plus, whatever you want to call it, make to people?
Oh, look, it made a huge difference, Tom. So for people who are already living on that amount, as you say, when we spoke to them, they told us that 41% of people were living on less than $50 a week. That's what they had left after they'd paid their rent. What they then told us, when this rate doubled, people were telling us they could buy new shoes for their kids to go to school. They weren't eating savings brand 2-minute noodles for dinner. They were actually able to buy a small birthday present for the first time for their children. And our financial counsellors were able to work with people to actually get down some of the debts that people had built up while they'd been on those kind of payments for years. Our emergency relief services saw a lot less people through the door from that group, and our housing services also didn't see the same number of people coming in. As we've seen that pared back, every time that rate decreases, there's an increase in the number of people who come back through the doors for food vouchers and food parcels. And we're certainly really, really worried for those households as we approach, the new year with that further fall. That's certainly really worrying, as we can see that unemployment's still going up.
So it doesn't seem like anyone's willing to commit to how high it got. It was more than the pension. It was a huge increase and would cost the budget billions and billions each year. What are you sort of hoping for in a realistic increase in your lobbying efforts with the government at the moment?
Look, we're saying when we saw it increase, and that was the best thing that came out of the pandemic. That was a great move by the federal government, really clever move. It lifted people out of poverty. It stopped those people who were, losing their jobs during the COVID crisis, falling into that level of poverty. And of course, it was a stimulus payment. It kept money moving around in local communities through small businesses and things in every electorate in the country. It lifted people above the poverty line for the first time since 1996. That's where we're saying it should be pegged. We know there's over 1 million Australian children living in households that are dependent on the job seeker allowance. It's just not right to have those kids and those families living back below the poverty line. It's choices we make. We recognise it's expensive. It was fantastic. We were able to do it this time. So clearly where there's political will, there's a way.
But I mean, a lot of this spending was essentially always going to be one-off. So, I mean, the fact that it was increased this time doesn't mean it makes it affordable always. I mean, what's the price tag on returning it to that level? It obviously always depends how many people are on it, but what are we talking?
Yeah, I mean, look, we do know that there's going to be, as I say, an increase in unemployment, so we know there's still more people to come onto this benefit. We would always say that this is a choice that we're all making. As taxpayers, we all contribute into this, and we can spend it here or we can spend it somewhere else. Some modelling that we did a couple of years ago, for example, found $135 billion going through things like negative gearing, capital gains tax concessions, superannuation concessions. That typically goes to the higher end. When we look at welfare benefits, obviously they typically go to people at the lower end of the income spectrum. And we're saying, let's make that choice, let's keep it there. It really doesn't make sense to have people who are out of work, especially in a recession when we've got these kind of numbers who are out of work. It doesn't make sense to have those people living so far below the poverty line that they're skipping 3 or 4 meals a week. It doesn't make them ready for those jobs. It doesn't, help them contribute when that does come along.
Are you hoping a circuit breaker here will be provided, because you've got unemployment of 6.9%, so a massive increase of the number of people suddenly reliant on this, and that message might go through to MPs, backbenchers, and that's where the groundswell comes from, because you've been calling this for years, and it hasn't happened.
Yeah, we've been in. We've not been a lonely voice. The Business Council of Australia and the OECD. They're all saying that old rate was way too low. So we're certainly hoping this is a circuit breaker. We've seen the difference it can make for people. These people aren't sitting at home twiddling their thumbs. 40-odd% of them were volunteering in their community, and way over 80% of these people said they wanted to do something with Centrelink for that benefit. It was just that the current activities were meaningless and dispiriting and didn't lead to paid work.
Right.
So it's not that people don't want to do something, they really, really do. And we just need to peg this rate in for good.
Kasy